books available at the bookstore. So another of the handouts today, as you see, is Professor Esposito's, and another addresses the question, so what is CORE good for? We know this is the time people are thinking about courses. You wonder, what is CORE good for? This handout gives you some practical answers to that question. CORE is good for a lot in a practical way. Over the weekend, I was talking to some sophomores, juniors, and seniors who are in CORE, who have gone through the program. They reminded me, or reinforced my feeling, that CORE is good for a lot more besides the practical things. I think, even as an advisor, sometimes I get hypnotized too much by the sort of apparatus of things. Where do you plug this in? How does this add up? Where do you add this? How do you subtract this? You see the worry about how everything is going to stack up for a career for the future. These students reaffirm my faith that there's a lot more to CORE than that there's a lot more that it's good for. And they're telling me how hard it is to explain that to someone that's just at the start. They were telling me now, they look back at the start, they see this was a very exciting time, but it was also a time I wasn't sure what it was all about. Now I see what the payoff is. There is a payoff. It's not, this is the beginning. The beginnings are very often the hard parts of things. There's certainly the parts where you can't really see what the end, what the payoff, what the high end of the thing is. They wished there was some way to explain this. They said, yes, it remains challenging, but you get that delight, that excitement, and higher levels of ability, that ease that comes with having mastered something, doing something that you still know is relatively hard to do, and certainly hard for other people to do. You've got the skills to do it. You have done it. It's partly, I think, because the program starts to come together. Can we just back off the mic a little bit? Starts to make sense in larger and larger ways. Starts to, this is an image, but it's an image that I think you can trust in. That second sun that Professor Devlin was talking about. That sun that shines on everything. There's a kind of fusion of all the different departments, all the different ways of looking at things. Starts to shine with more and more power as you go through the program. At least one of the people that I was talking to, one of the students, used the word priceless, which of course warms a teacher's heart. I think there's some truth in that. So I wanted to take this opportunity to encourage the folks. If you're finding it difficult, if you're wondering whether it's worth it, this is the beginning. We're beginning here. You've begun. Don't lose that beginning if you are getting something out of it. The proof is in the people that have gone through it. The people that have seen that whatever, as they were telling me, whatever your career goals are, whatever your major is, whatever you're aiming at, this is one of the best things you could do with your time. This is one of the main reasons I'm glad I came here, one of the main reasons I'm glad I came to college. They mentioned particular things, Don Quixote, Lao Tzu, who we study next semester, Mozart, who we study in the fourth semester. The difficulties, they tell me, we can imagine this as teachers, it's great to hear it from students, are more than worth it. I mentioned last time, after lecture today, we have some mid-semester refreshments for you in the lobby. We've also invited a number of upperclassmen who have taken CORE, who wanted to talk in their own way to this year's freshmen. They will be there, talk about the program, why they found it worthwhile, how it fits in with their major. So as you enjoy the food and drink, which I hope you do, I hope you will also talk with them. They'll be honest, I think, both about the difficulties and the rewards. Most of them have taken the entire CORE. Some have only continued with the humanities or the sciences. Those are both possibilities. We have a table in each corner of the lobby. Students from different divisions of the college will be at each of those tables, eager to talk as we lunch donuts and drink coffee. So, the lecture today, we are fortunate to have with us this morning Professor Stephen Esposito. Professor Esposito from the Department of Classics and CORE. Professor Esposito took his bachelor's degree in philosophy before doing graduate work in classics. So his approach to the ancient world includes a philosophical grounding as well as the linguistic and cultural grounding of classics. Much of his scholarly work is concerned with Greek tragedy, including a forthcoming book on Sophocles' Oedipus the King. Besides the CORE, his teaching has included courses in Greek and Latin, courses on tragedy, on epic, on philosophy, on Herodotus' histories. It's a a great pleasure to have him here this morning, Professor Steve Esposito.
Good morning. I'll be making frequent reference, how's this sound, okay? To the handouts and also to the text of the Oresteia. So it would be good to have both nearby. For a reference sheet or chart to who's who in the House of Atreus, some of you have forgotten, you can refer to the chart on the bottom of page 4 of the outline. I understand that the outline is formidable in size. We're only going to deal with a few sections of it, so you needn't get frightened. It's more for a reference for you, for your discussion sections and potential papers. I'll have to sort of rumble through this because of the shortened period, so please bear with me. God set me free from all the pain. Theus, God's, is the first word of the trilogy. Theus menaito ton dapalagain ponon. The last words of the trilogy describe Zeus and Fate embracing. This simple mechanism of framing, of bookending the three plays indicates the degree to which gods will saturate the trilogy, reminding us that human action will transpire under divine vigilance. Now this watchman, posted by the queen, wants deliverance from the weariness of a dew-drenched year-long night watch. But his pain is deeper than that, as we'll soon discover. First, however, let us ask who this guy is, and why Aeschylus starts his trilogy with an anonymous character who will disappear forever after 43 lines. Is he Aeschylus' version of the Homeric watchman in Odyssey 4, posted by Aegisthus for a year to spy on the homecoming of his hated cousin Agamemnon? Remember how that watchman, upon seeing Agamemnon, ran to his master with the news. Aegisthus, the son of Thyestes, then ambushed the king with 20 men in the palace and slaughtered him as one strikes down an ox at his manger. Is this the same watchman that opens the Agamemnon? Emphatically not. It turns out that this poor guy, at line 19, on page 105 of Fagel's translation, and you can have that at hand if you wish, cries out for the hard times come to the house, no longer run like the great palace of old. Well, what has happened to the palace of old? Well, the main thing that's happened, as we learn in line 13, is that Argos is now governed by a woman who maneuvers like a man. The one who holds the reins of powers is a woman whose heart, full of high hopes, plots like a man. But why would she do that? Why plot like a man? Is being a female somehow insufficient? Indeed it is. At least at the time this play was produced in 458 BCE. In 5th century Athens, the man was boss not only of the city, but of the house as well. Women had no legal rights. They were not citizens. Females were neither to be seen nor heard. As you know, Penelope spends most of her time upstairs. Thus, to maneuver like a man was necessarily to maneuver against a man and against the power structure that he embodied. Within the first 20 lines of the play, then, the rustic watchman with no name has set the agenda for the entire trilogy. This will be a battle of the sexes, and the stakes will not only be life and death, but indeed who should be in charge of the two most fundamental units of civilization, the house and the city. A related question. Why does the play begin at night? Perhaps because that makes the flash of fire from Troy announcing the king's return much more dramatic. Light will dispel darkness, and this physical progression from night to day prefigures a gradual metaphoric progression over the course of the trilogy, from obscurity to clarity, from violence to law, from public to private, from family to city, from female to male. With each passing play, the Oresteia and its themes will become more lucent and transparent, just as the language of the actors becomes more easy to understand. As you can see on the outline, the beacon will be for the watchman a blessed end to all our pain, or so he hopes. But the exact repetition in line 23 of the Greek phrase apallagain panon, a setting free from pain, which also ends line 1, indicates that the watchman's anxiety runs deeper than just night-long weariness from his watch. No, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. The Queen's watchman would like to tell us all about that pain from which he wants deliverance, but he can't tell us. Why is that? Because the rest is silence. The ox is on my tongue, he says. Aye, but the house and these old stones give them a voice, and what a tale they tell. Thus it is that the watchman concludes his soliloquy and disappears. How strange. This man has a story to tell, but he's not going to tell us. He can't tell us. This is just the first of many remarkable silences that punctuate the Oresteia and interrupt its flow of language. The ox is on my tongue. What a simple but arresting image. The doorway to his mouth is blocked, as if some cyclops had rolled a huge boulder there to prevent winged words from escaping. The doorway to speech is shut, and so the flow of language must stop. The watchman is not going to tell us what he knows. Since an ox is male, the ox must be a man, or the androgynous equivalent, a woman who maneuvers like a man. Clearly, the ox is Clytemnestra. She so intimidates this poor fellow that he can't even speak her name. As we will see soon, she controls not only language, both her own and others, but indeed all the other sign systems of the palace as well, at least, that is, until she meets up with Cassandra. The watchman's last line is, I never say a word. As you can see on the top of page 1 on the outline, he says in Greek simply, leithomai, I forget. Clytemnestra, even in her absence, has made him forget, or rather, made him afraid to remember. The presence of Elie Wiesel at this university reminds us of the same kind of theme, that we must not be afraid to remember. She controls memory, and in this she resembles her sister, Helen. Remember in Odyssey 4, when Telemachus is at Sparta? Menelaus is recounting his memories of Troy and everyone starts crying. So Helen puts into their wine a drug of forgetfulness, literally nepenthe, not pain, to make them forget their pain. Appropriately so, since she's the one that caused it. Now in the Greek language, memory is intimately connected with truth. Indeed, as you can see at the top of your outline, the word for truth is aletheia, which means literally unforgetfulness. Perhaps some of you remember from Greek mythology the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, flowing through Hades, whose water produced loss of memory in those who drank of it. Like the river in Hades, Clytemnestra tries to induce loss of memory within the palace. It is surely no accident that with Cassandra, the the prophetess, God bless you, and concubine of Agamemnon, is about to enter the palace in which she knows she's going to be killed. She speaks of the doors as, quote, the gates of Hades. Memory is the doorway to truth. So that in controlling or trying to control memory, Clytemnestra also tries to control truth, which raises the question, is it possible to control the truth? The Oresteia will raise this question profoundly. In creating his vision of Clytemnestra, whose role apparently was played by Aeschylus himself, the dramatist created one of the most formidable and calculating women ever to step on stage. Why is it then that the play isn't named after her? She has twice as many lines as any other actor, 4 times as many lines as her wimpish husband. Clytemnestra clearly has a much more provocative character, perhaps the most interesting in the 32 surviving Greek tragedies. I would guess her only rivals on the Greek stage are Medea and Antigone. But both those women get plays named after them, not Clytemnestra. But I would suspect that's what angers her so much. That's not why she's been scheming for the last 10 years. Clytemnestra's problem is that, unlike the Watchmen, she can't forget. Her memory is on fire with fury, and the blazing beacon, the giant beard of flame that leaps across the Aegean Sea via 8 mountaintops that she's so carefully arranged, this blazing fire will reignite in Argos. And it's going to burn the whole place down, or at least practically so. So our job is to find out just why this woman is so pissed off. To learn that, we must go back in time, which is exactly where Aeschylus takes us in the opening song of the chorus. The first page of your outline plots the approximate course of the story. Ten years earlier, as the senior statesmen of Argos tell us, the huge Greek armada under Agamemnon, was set to sail for Troy from Aulis, the Greek port, in order to avenge Paris' abduction of Helen, the promiscuous wife of Agamemnon's brother Menelaus. The 2 sons of Atreus are likened in the first bird omen, at the beginning of the song, to a pair of eagles robbed of their young. And so Zeus, the protector of hospitality rights, drives them against Paris, their Trojan adversary at law. The key point here is that Zeus sanctions the Greek expedition. Okay, the ships are ready to sail from Aulis, when suddenly a second bird omen occurs. This time, 2 eagles rip apart a pregnant rabbit and destroy the unborn young, thus violating the biological bond between the mother and the child. Artemis, protectress of childbirth and of wild animals and of female rites of passage, hates the sacrifice, as it is called, of the tender young, and so demands a second unholy human sacrifice. This can only mean Iphigenia, daughter of Clytemnestra. But such a sacrifice would create major trouble for Agamemnon because, as Calchas, the trusty prophet of the Greek army, says at the top of 108, quote, "The architect of vengeance grows strong in the house with no fear of her husband. Here she waits the terror raging back and back into the future, the stealth, the law of the hearth, the mother, memory, fury, womb of fury, child avenging fury. Clytemnestra is memory incarnate." This is incredibly potent language. Struggling, as I am, and you're reading of the Agamemnon, struggling to understand the dense imagery and diction, don't worry. You're not alone. Scholars struggle as well. Aeschylus has purposely created an almost impenetrable world of words, but this imagistic labyrinth reflects the moral density and the turbulence of the events surrounding the Greek expedition. I encourage you to persist in your efforts because the Oresteia gradually moves out of this weighty and confusing cosmos Soon there will be light for you and for the troubled house of Atreus. Okay, on page 1 of the outline, we've just completed a brief analysis of the section called The Sign of Artemis' Wrath. At this tense moment in the storyline, when a second unholy sacrifice seems imminent, the chorus suddenly interrupts itself with an intense prayer of desperation to Zeus. This invocation of the god seems to have nothing to do with the omens and events at Aulis. So for a moment, I'll skip over this prayer or hymn to Zeus and jump ahead to section 3 of the first song. Section 3 on the same page is labeled The Consequence of Artemis' Wrath. Here the story resumes. The angry Artemis, after the fashion of the angry Poseidon in the Odyssey, pins the Greek ships in the storm of the harbor. Calchas the prophet tells Agamemnon that Artemis must have blood. The climax of the story is told on page 110, and I quote, "And once he slipped his neck in the strap of fate, his spirit veering, black, impure, unholy. Once he turned, he stopped at nothing, seized with the frenzy, blinding, driving to outrage, wretched frenzy, cause of all our grief." What are we to make of all this? The gods have clearly put Agamemnon between a rock and a hard place. Pain both ways in what is worse. On the one hand, Zeus has sanctioned the expedition. On the other hand, Artemis has detained the fleet. Furthermore, it's difficult to understand exactly why Artemis is angry. On the face of things, this goddess, protectress of animals and childbirth, is enraged at the eagles for ripping apart the pregnant rabbit and so violating the sacred uterine bond between mother and daughter. And that may well be as far as we should take the matter. But the eagles, as the first omen suggests, might be interpreted as symbols of Agamemnon and Menelaus. But if so, why would Artemis be angry at them? They've done nothing wrong. They're victims, not victimizers at this point. Paris is clearly the guilty party. Maybe Artemis is angry at the violations of the female that the two Greek kings are going to commit, namely the sacrifice of Iphigenia and the rape of the woman at Troy. But if this is so, Aeschylus makes it none too clear. And anyway, why would she be angry at something they haven't even done yet? So for the moment, we have a puzzling situation. Another possible approach to this problem is to look to the overall structure of the song. At the bottom of page 1, in section C, the analysis that's set off in italics, you can see that there is the sign of Artemis' wrath, namely the eagle's feast on the pregnant rabbit, and the consequence of Artemis' wrath, namely the sacrifice of Iphigenia. But there is no explicit expression of the cause of that wrath. Maybe this is because the chorus understands the situation no better than we do, and so they pray to Zeus, as if to suggest that he might be the implied cause of Artemis' wrath. Her wrath may reflect his inscrutable will. Perhaps he wants to see Agamemnon between a rock and a hard place, so that he can make the arrogant man suffer into truth. For that axiom about suffering into truth, pathe mathos, is one of the two cornerstones of Zeus's sovereignty. This might seem to us like a violent version of justice, but then again, so wasn't Yahweh's treatment of Job. Job, however, was a righteous and compassionate man. With Agamemnon, you get a different sense altogether. Even the chorus of old men who are his loyal supporters say that once he put on that strap of fate, his spirit veered, black, impure, unholy. Once he turned, he stopped at nothing. He hoisted her over the altar like a goat and gagged her with a bridle. Granted, he's between a rock and a hard place. Still, he proceeds all too eagerly once the decision is made. And that eagerness reflects a pride, a desire for reputation, a drive for military glory that spells trouble. And we see that arrogance on display all too ostentatiously when he had the audacity to drive up his chariot to the palace with his concubine, Cassandra, in the back seat. A fragment of a lost play of Aeschylus, quoted on page 26 of Fegel's introduction, addresses this situation of Agamemnon well. I quote, God plants a cause or fault in man when he wants to destroy a house entirely. Nevertheless, a man must not be restless with his words. Agamemnon is precisely that, reckless men must learn by suffering. So then, should we say that Agamemnon freely chose to do what he did? Or was he fated to kill his daughter? On the one hand, Agamemnon, in sacrificing his daughter, makes a conscious choice, favoring military glory over his family. On the other hand, his act is circumscribed by a number of higher powers: Artemis, fate, necessity, Zeus, chance. And to these must be added the uncanny power of the past to impinge upon the present in the form of the ancestral curse. As Cassandra informs us just before she's murdered by Clytemnestra, Agamemnon's dilemma has a history that reaches back to the primal act of the kin murder, when Atreus slew the children of his brother Thyestes and fed them to him at a banquet. On account of this atrocity, the avenging Furies besieged the house, singing of the frenzy that began it all. For the crime of the father, Atreus, Agamemnon the son must pay. So all these forces intersect and collide in Agamemnon's decision-making, and thereby render the notion of free will, and moral autonomy inadequate to the complexity and multiplicity of factors motivating his tragic action. The protagonist appears not as a clear-cut personality or moral agent, but rather a point of intersection for diverse forces: the violent grace of the gods, fate, chance, necessity, human responsibility. Man in sum is seen as a force field, an unstable compound of beast, man, and God, of ethos and daimon, of character and destiny. And they collide in man. As my teacher and dearly missed friend and former colleague here at BU, William Arrowsmith, put it, Agamemnon chooses his necessity, but Zeus' necessity equally chooses him. Being the kind of man Agamemnon is, he chooses as he does. And one could indeed say the same thing about Oedipus. Apollo's oracle, after all, said that he would marry his mother and kill his father. And indeed, he ended up doing those things. But does that mean Oedipus was bound by fate? Apollo did know the future, but that doesn't mean he ordered it, any more than when Jesus prophesies to St. Peter and says, "Before the cock crows, thou shalt deny me 3 times." Are we to imagine that Peter had no free choice? Surely not. Jesus knew the future. He didn't make it happen. When Oedipus discovers the truth about the incest and patricide and then blinds himself, the chorus asks him, "What superhuman power drove you on to do such a deed?" And here is his reply. "Apollo, friends, Apollo. He ordained my agonies, but the hand that struck these eyes was mine alone. Nobody else. I did it all myself." In Oedipus, as in Agamemnon, there is this collision of character and destiny. In some, the actions of these heroes are doubly motivated, with a divine and a human element. This is an important point. What is distinctive about Greek tragedy is that it puts the emphasis on the human responsibility. It radicalizes our actions. It is not accidental that the Christians and the Jews never created a genre of tragedy. I don't consider Shakespeare a Christian writer. So he certainly is not, in my estimation, and most people's, I think. But the Jewish people and the Christians don't have a genre of tragedy. Job is a tragic book and a tragic story, but it's not of the genre of tragedy. The reason for this unique contribution of the Greeks is, I think, simple. The Jews taught us to believe. The Greeks taught us to think. In a culture that is buoyed by a safety net of God the Father, there is little possibility for free fall. In a culture like the classical Greeks, where almost all responsibility lies with man, there is no safety net or no afterlife. Only then can you have tragedy. For the Greeks, death is the end. That's why they search so hard for glory. They have to act now in the light of the day. Remember what Achilles says to Odysseus in Odyssey 11. Better, I say, to break sod as a farmhand for some poor country man than to lord it over all the exhausted dead. From these digressive marks I return to the Oresteia and another issue in the first choral song that needs to be addressed, and this regards Zeus himself. As the chorus reminds us, his patriarchy is predicated on family violence. The story of how Zeus gained control of the Olympians is told very elusively in the middle of the prayer in lines 169 to 76. Again, page 1 of the outline under the hymn to Zeus, number 2. It is told elusively, and indeed elusively, because Aeschylus' audience would have been completely familiar with the myth in a way that we aren't. Hesiod told it in his Theogony, which describes the origin of the cosmos and the gods. The main point for our discussion is this. In order not to be overthrown by any of his children, Zeus swallowed his pregnant wife, thus circumventing the natural law of myth and of reality, namely that a father will be replaced by his son. Freud would later call this the Oedipus complex. Zeus avoids this potential threat of being overthrown not by swallowing his children, as his father Cronos had done and unsuccessfully, but by swallowing his pregnant wife, Metis. Zeus, by looking at the failed attempts of his father and grandfather, realizes that ultimately the one to be feared is not the child, but the mother who has the ability to produce a child. By swallowing his wife and giving birth to the androgynous Athena from his head, Zeus effectively appropriates the female's power of reproduction. At the end of the day, Zeus is both mother and father. But that threat of being overthrown is gone forever. Such is the harsh Oedipal reality of Zeus's rule and his justice. It is appropriate, therefore, that the chorus sings here in line 184 in the same passage on the handout about the other cornerstone of Zeus's rule, namely that from the gods there comes a violent grace, biaios charis. A violent grace comes from the gods. No small measure of the Oresteia's magnificence resides in the ferocity and passion with which Aeschylus tries to understand this violent grace of the gods. The violent love of these gods and the justice attendant to that violent love will find itself played out in the house of Atreus. Otherwise stated, the house of Atreus will reenact the history of the house of Zeus. In short, human history will imitate divine history. Almost. For although Zeus can swallow his wife, a mortal man cannot swallow his mate. At least not physically, but metaphorically he can, and he has. For instance, he could deprive her of her citizenship rights, as did the 5th century Athenians of the time of the Oresteia. And it is this issue that constitutes the heart of the trilogy, at least in my estimation. How can the female and the house of which she is the watchdog be incorporated successfully into the male power structure that is the Greek city? I would like to make 2 more points about the role of the chorus. The first regards its function in tragedy generally, and the second regards its function specifically in the Agamemnon. First, a general point. Visually, the chorus occupied the foreground space of the orchestra. Oh, you're getting good views of the killing. Look at that. Beautiful. You can see the circle of the orchestra in the middle of the theater. There's nothing like this in our culture. 15,000 people seated here, 12 or 15 choral members, and 2 or 3 actors. And on stage, before the entire city. It's not accidental that this is at the heart of the city in Athens, on the Acropolis. The whole subject of Greek tragedy is family violence and the relationship of the family to the city. It's therapy put out there for everybody. Perhaps even women were allowed to come to the theater. It's a very vexed issue. We do not know whether women could attend the theater. If so, certainly they were in the distant seats. But it's a remarkable contribution, and I'm certain that it could only happen in a democracy. No other cities, Sparta, Corinth, none of them have tragedy. And its lifetime is almost coincident with the 100-year lifetime of democracy, at least classical democracy. The theater allows people like Clytemnestra to expose the assumptions of the power structure. Maybe over the top, maybe not. But you expose the assumptions of the male power structure, and not just that, of the entire city, in order precisely to expand the power of the city morally and spiritually. Even if the chorus is not necessarily the voice of the city, the chorus is in the middle. They mediate between the one and the many. You can see how the orchestra, the dancing space, is linked, is almost engulfed by the community. The chorus are part of the community. The chorus would be right up here dancing. And they link you to me as actor. It's understandable then that what they assert are the norms. Nothing in excess. Learn by suffering. Know thyself. That's at the heart of the city. But we need to go beyond that. The polis, the city has a tendency to become a closed feedback system, like any large institution does. And it must be exploded. And that is at the heart of the Greek city. That's why it's called the theater of Dionysus. Dionysus is the god of wine, of madness, of explosion. This out here, and the chorus in here, that's Apollo's world, the god of reason. It's a conflict between Dionysus and Apollo. And the Greeks have the wisdom to put it right there on stage. It's hard for me to imagine that women weren't allowed into the theater. But they might not have been. But then, who was Clytemnestra for, and Antigone and Medea? Now, with regard to the Agamemnon, it is a remarkable fact that the chorus has 830 lines. In a play of some 1,700 lines, the chorus has 830. Remember, Agamemnon has only 80. Despite this overwhelming statistic, the old men scarcely participate in the action at all. That is not the chorus's role. They're the mediators. They're not the actors. They're the reactors. I do something up here. Antigone says to her sister after she buried her brother, when Creon said, "You will not bury him," she says, "I will." And her sister, after the fact, says, "Antigone, let me take some of the blame with you." And she says, "I chose to live. I chose to die. You chose to live." It's the actors on stage. They take a stand. Clytemnestra, in all her glorious culpability, says, "Here I stood and here I struck." That's the beauty of this woman. She sees beyond guilt, beyond shame, not beyond good and evil, but gloriously beyond guilt and shame, or almost so. So, what is the role of this chorus? Why is it so long? 218 lines in Greek, by far and away the longest song in Greek tragedy. We have the Watchman for 40 lines, and then this song for 220 lines. Why? It does nothing to move the plot forward. Yet by resurrecting the past, it reveals the present, that the present action can only be understood as a consequence of that past. You are not what you are sitting in your seats, but you carry with you the clenched fist of the past. In Robert Pinsky's wonderful phrase, that's what you are. Of course, you take that past into the future and set your stamp on it in the moment. But that past is who you are. In Macbeth it said that done is done. The past can come back to get you as it does with the Furies, as it does with your nightmares. The song focuses almost entirely on the sacrifice of Iphigenia because it is that event which motivates all the rest of the trilogy. The murder of Agamemnon, the murder of Clytemnestra, the trial, the vindication of Orestes. Now I mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, that the songs decrease in length. Why don't you look to page 6 of your handout, which is the analysis of the first, it's a diagram of the first half. Is that correct, page 6? Yeah. Look at the bottom register, horizontally. Notice the 4 songs. They decrease from 218 to 133 to 101 to 59 lines, respectively. This is quite a remarkable decrease. As the action builds to its climax, the songs become less and less prominent. Or all 4 choral odes insistently focus on past events, such as the sacrifice of Iphigenia, the theft of Helen, the sorrows that caused the Trojan War. And just at the moment when we've learned everything that we need to know, then we can have murder. Now we can begin to understand why she did it. So let's now turn to Clytemnestra for a minute. The main points are set forth on page 3 of the outline in the passage marked in number 3. If you should like to follow the text as well, you can turn to page 137 of your text. The situation is this. Clytemnestra has commanded her servants to pave Agamemnon's way to the door with expensive and fine tapestries. She says, "Let the red stream flow, justice lead him in." Agamemnon balks at stepping on the precious material, and he says in wonderful lines, "You treat me like a woman, groveling, gaping up at me. What am I, some barbarian peacocking out of Asia? Never cross my path with robes and draw the lightning. Never, only the gods deserve the pomps of honor. I am human, and it makes my pulses steer with dread." Well, it should. I want to notice here how Agamemnon defines himself. First and foremost, he doesn't want to be treated as a woman. That would be a sign of weakness. Secondly, he's a Greek, not a barbarian from Asia. After all, didn't he just defeat the Trojans? And thirdly, he's a man, not a god. This triple delineation is useful for us because it reveals so clearly the categories by which a Greek man defined himself. Male, not female. Greek, not barbarian. Man, not god. Now these assertions are particularly interesting because Agamemnon sets them forth so adamantly. Yet, and you could turn now to page 138 of your text if you wish, Clytemnestra demolishes them all, and she does it lickety-split. At line 938, she says about his hesitation to trample on the carpet, "Would you have sworn this act in a time of terror?" He responds that yes, to fulfill an emergency vow to the gods he would. But what is the relevance of the question? This is emphatically not a time of emergency, but of celebration, and certainly not one with respect to the gods. But we can see where she's going, weaving her web of words. Like Penelope, She weaves her words. At line 930, she goes for the jugular. But Priam, king of Troy, can you see him if he had your success? I sure can, he says. He'd be walking all over those tapestries of God. But again, what's the relevance of the question? Agamemnon has just boasted that he's not a barbarian peacocking out of Asia. That's what Priam is. But she's got his number, and she's singing her tune. You're so vain, and you probably think this song is about you. Her flattery gets him thinking, well, if Priam can do it, why can't I? Her last thrust is deadly. And you fear the reproach of common men? Where's the glory without a little gall? Agamemnon, in his infinite modesty, has just asserted that he was a man, not a god. But Clytemnestra here separates him from the hoi polloi, the common man. She knows her enemy better than he knows himself. She's doing with words what she's going to be doing in a minute with her sword. Poor man, better to remain silent and appear a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. Within a few lines, she has her maids taking off his boots of blood and glory. With that simple act, she divests him of any power that he had left. Aeschylus boils it all down in this short passage. It's a war between male and female, and the weapons are words. Imagine the staging here. She stands proudly at the doorway of the palace as he walks down the tongue of blood that stretches out into the orchestra where the chariot is parked. You can just imagine it from a picture like this, what it would look like if you were in the audience, especially standing this far back at the end of the theater. The visuals would be striking. Out of that doorway, it's just a tongue of red. It's a symbol of the violence of the past, the present, and the future. It looks back to the helpless young Iphigenia slaughtered at the altar. It looks back to the bloody victims of Troy who stand before us, and the silent person of Clytemnestra in the back seat of the chariot. It looks to the present, of course, to the murder that's going to happen in about 2 minutes. And it looks to the future as well, because Orestes will do the same thing to his mother. Agamemnon, of course, has no clue. In his myopia, he is a perfect candidate for Nietzsche's Spider-Man. Nietzsche, who saw so much so clearly, wrote as follows about the incapacity of most of us to see beyond our noses. Quote, "We sit within our web, we spiders, and whatever we catch in it, we can catch nothing at all except that which allows itself to be caught precisely in our net." So Clytemnestra stands at the doorway. We've already seen in the Odyssey that whoever controls the doorway controls the house. The Cyclops controlled the entrance to the cave until Odysseus outwitted him by tying himself to the sheep's underbelly, thereby effecting a sort of Trojan horse trick in reverse. The Trojan horse concealed him and got him into the city. The ram concealed him and got him out. Clytemnestra, too, is a master of the door. Remember, she was the ox on the tongue. She controlled language, and she controls it again now. Jim Morrison understood, between the known and the unknown lie the doors, hence the name of the band. And so Clytemnestra, watchdog of her kennel, stands perched at the palace door like the monster Scylla, says Cassandra, Scylla, nested in her rocky perch, devouring Odysseus' sailors. But it all changes. Agamemnon is a pushover, but his concubine, who's been sitting incredibly in silence for 300 lines. Imagine that. We're looking at Cassandra. We're all looking at Cassandra while this is going on. And she's there, silent for 300 lines in that chariot before she gets out. Three times Clytemnestra demands that she enter the palace. She even tries hand signals, thinking maybe this barbarian peacocking out of Asia doesn't know Greek. She is met to her dismay with total silence. Only after Clytemnestra stomps off stage in rage, only then does Cassandra speak. The pawn has captured the queen in her own game. She's a woman, and she knows a woman's way with words. At one point, Cassandra astonishingly calls Clytemnestra simply the tongue. You can see it on the top of page 4 on your outline. At line 1237, she says to the chorus, Agamemnon doesn't know what kind of detestable bitch's tongue shall strike. Her refusal to get caught in Clytemnestra's web signifies the beginning of the queen's end. Cassandra foresees her own death, and unlike Agamemnon, she goes knowingly and freely through the doors of Clytemnestra's slaughterhouse, which she aptly calls the gates of Hades. One more point about Cassandra. I ask you to turn to page 3 of the outline, passage 5, and also, if you're ambidextrous, to the bottom of page 4, the diagram at the bottom right, which illustrates the passage on page 3. The chart is entitled Cassandra and the Silencing of the Female. The context is that the chorus has likened Cassandra to a nightingale who mourns for her murdered son. The story goes like this. Procne was married to Tereus, king of Thrace. They had a son, Itus. One day, Tereus raped Procne's sister, Philomela, and cut her tongue out so that she couldn't tell her sister what happened. But Philomela wove the story of the rape onto a tapestry, woman always weaving. When Procne read the message, she killed her son Itus to get revenge on her husband Tereus. The gods turned Philomela into a sparrow and Procne into a nightingale to protect them. Procne, as a nightingale with her shrill cry, eternally mourns the son she murdered. Now the point of the story is this. The chorus likens Cassandra to Procne, but Cassandra replies that Procne is much better off because her life in feathers is one of ease. Cassandra's fate, on the other hand, is to die at Clytemnestra's sword. The sad irony is this. Procne is silenced by a male. Cassandra is silenced by a female. This story signals, I think, the end for Clytemnestra. Not only is her victim innocent, as Cassandra is and Agamemnon is not, but her victim, more importantly, is one of her own kind. To be sure, Clytemnestra will strut her stuff, as you can see from the quote on the top of page 4 of the outline. At line 1391, she proudly boasts, words, endless words I've said to serve the moment. Now it makes me proud to tell the truth. Here I stand and here I struck. Clytemnestra, as word merchant, is the precursor of the sophists who will later invade Athens and rival Socrates. You'll meet some of them in Plato's Republic. And her pride in words is nowhere more deliciously sampled than when she asserts boldly, as she stands over the corpse of Cassandra, she brings a fresh, voluptuous relish to my bed. One critic has wonderfully called this the apotheosis of erotic sadism. Clytemnestra is the leading lady of the Athenian stage. She's only rivaled perhaps by Lady Macbeth. Not so much, as I said before, because she's beyond good and evil. She is not. But she does seem gloriously beyond guilt and shame. She refuses to be under anybody's thumb. With her Betty Davis eyes embodied by her coils of words, she'll take a tumble on you and roll you like you were dice. But sadly, by the play's end, even she seems to acknowledge that a price has been paid. When Aegisthus, the cock on the dunghill who struts so insipidly beside his mate, when he calls out his henchmen with their swords to face the old men of the chorus with their walking sticks, Clytemnestra intervenes and says astonishingly, no more bloodshed. What we did was destiny. The spirit's brutal hoof has struck our heart. I take that to mean that all her words of deception, all her attempts to spin a spider web around others and around Agamemnon have now begun to spin around her. As Cassandra walks through the gates of death, having stomped on the robes of Apollo and thus having freed herself from him, she boldly and truly proclaims, I am free at last. Clytemnestra, I fear, could not say the same. So I end with a poem that mediates on the cost of freedom, the price paid somewhere along the line, a price that both you and I know all too well, and of which the Oresteia reminds us in such a passionate way. It is a poem called From This Distance by Richard Gary, a prisoner, from a book entitled From This Distance, Poetry from Prison, edited by Meg Taylor and my friend Rosanna Warren of the University Professors Program here at BU. From This Distance by Richard Gary. If I look hard enough, I can see her. She is everything I need. She is all that. She curves like a violent river. She's clean like a country breath. She's as long as my imagination, yet short as my patience. She is what I most desire, but I fear her. She changes so rapidly. I fear she'll forget me. Then I open my eyes, razor wire slices, baring vicious teeth. It laughs at my immobility. She is freedom, and from this distance, I hardly know her. Thank you.